Hey guys, Dolphin here, and welcome to my first ever response video. Today I'm going to be responding to a video by Charming Man 93 entitled 5 Reasons Not to Have Kids. Now I like Charming Man and I respect his work and a lot of his opinions, but he and I don't necessarily see eye to eye on this, and I felt like, telling him why. So without further ado, let's get started.
Hey, what's up guys? Now today's video is going to be slightly different to the usual stuff that I do. This is going to be a top 5 reasons not to have kids.
Alright brother, lay it on me.
Overpopulation. Overpopulation is a massive problem in today's world. And yes, I know what some of you are thinking. Mitch, there are a myriad of different reasons why overpopulation is happening. Yes, but having more babies is a massive factor in overpopulation. It's called overpopulation for a reason.
Well, that's true, and having children certainly does contribute to that fact. But here's the deal, Mitch. When you say there's too many people on this planet, you put the emphasis on the words too many people. When I say the same thing, I put the emphasis on this planet. But I feel like I've interrupted you. I'm sorry, go on.
Now, since the 1400s, after the bubonic plague swept almost most of the world, in the 1340s and 50s, the human population has been growing steadily and more rapidly since that time. So through most of that time anyway, there's been a sort of equilibrium between the birth rates and the death rates, so that the population has grown steadily and not putting too much of a strain on the earth and our resources.
Alright, for the sake of my viewers, I'm going to cut the screeching part out. But as far as the equilibrium you were talking about, it was actually mostly due to ongoing wars throughout most of the world during that time period. Conquest wars from Europe to the Americas, and a lot of European wars, not to mention what was going on in Asia throughout an entire 2,000-year period. And I don't necessarily see that as the type of equilibrium that the human race would want.
Now, what does overpopulation mean for us? How does it mean that we should not have kids? Well, with more humans means that there are less sources for the whole human race to use and to grow with, and to build houses and cities and to feed ourselves and to drink. And this creates friction, because this means that with so limited resources, that means countries, cultures, individuals will be fighting over the scraps that are left, because the earth simply cannot sustain the amount of people that are currently being born.
It is true that the Earth does have limited resources and we can hold only a finite amount of people, but like I said earlier, it really comes down to where you put the emphasis in the phrase, there are too many people on this planet. And besides the obvious implications that I'm making when I say that, there is also to be considered the advancements in technology and building materials, food production, and so forth that can help sustain a larger population. If you look at the advancement in computer technology in just the past 30 years, and factor in Moore's law, it doesn't seem unreasonable that humanity should become a spaceborne species soon, and then we'll be able to extract resources from several different locations throughout our own solar system, and even begin colonizing astral bodies outside of our own planet, which may be able to sustain exponentially large populations. So the idea that the population is limited to what the Earth can sustain is, in my opinion, a very short-sighted and limited mindset.
And most of these people who are being born are not rich, or at least middle class or working class to the extent that they are well educated and skilled. Most of these people, sadly, are poverty stricken, they live under the breadline, and they haven't got much of an education to speak of. So that means that they have no knowledge when it comes to sexual education or contraception or how family planning works. So they have loads of children, which means that the state or whatever system they have has a massive burden, and this impacts all of us.
And so it went for generations.
Yeah, I had to throw that in there. But it illustrates an interesting point. You are correct in saying that most of the people who are breeding en masse are not exactly the best and brightest of our generations. But this isn't a problem of reproduction. You see, my government and yours, and most of the governments around the world, actually pay their debts by borrowing money that they intend to pay back with interest based on tax rates, which are derived from the number of children born this year to determine how much tax they're going to make, say, 20 years from now. And government loans are stretched out over a much longer period than any loans you or I take out. And considering birth rates of today determine how much money they can borrow for tomorrow, there's really no incentive to the government or any state to stop incentivizing people who shouldn't have children from having those children. But I digress, and this is a subject for a different video.
And number 2, responsibility. It's a big responsibility to have a child or children, and for some people this is simply too much. Now I know what you're saying, and we'll get to that later, but Mitch, surely these people are just selfish and immature. Not necessarily. I've had friends who've had abortions because they simply cannot afford to have a child. Maybe they're too young, maybe they don't have enough money, but either way, some families are thrust upon this without them really wanting to. Even though we have the pill and condoms, they're not that effective. Even though they're effective most of the time, sometimes it takes only one instance of failure for there to be a pregnancy, and that means decisions have to be made. And for some people, the pressure of having children is simply too much, at least on their finances, let alone the physical and mental things which we'll get into.
Come on, Mitch, you know this is a terrible argument. Basically, you're saying that there are people out there who aren't responsible enough to have children. And this argument works for them, but only for them, and in all reality, it's more of a rationalization than it is a reason.
You know, some people simply cannot because maybe they aren't immature, or maybe they're not ready. Maybe they're having mentally ill stuff in their heads, which means that they're incapable of being responsible. It's not necessarily because they're immature and they're selfish and they just can't be bothered, and when they have kids they just neglect the children. Some people are just physically and mentally incapable of doing it.
Alright, this one kind of hits me personally because before I had my son, I was a complete and total waste of a human being. But there's something about seeing your child come into this world that makes you suddenly realize that if God himself came down and challenged you to a fist fight, you would win. In that moment, when you see your kid born, you would win that fight, and you know it. And you suddenly realize that there is nothing you can't or won't do. But then again, maybe that's just me. I like to believe that it's a lot of other people, though, as well.
And yes, number 3 is societal pressures. As I alluded to earlier, there is a societal pressure, hell, even familial pressure for people to have kids. Usually couples, single people, less so. So that means you can be a couple who wishes to have no children whatsoever, and you will be hanging out with other couples who have children, and they will ask you, why are you not having kids? Why are you so selfish? So there's this pressure. I don't think most of it is intentional, but there is this pressure for couples to have kids, even if they don't want it, even if they might not be capable of doing it, and this creates strains on them. And also, their grandparents and their parents will be pushing them to, because they have this silly fantasy in their heads that they want to continue the family line and their lineage and to have kids, to show that their genes are passing on. And what I don't agree with is that it's selfish to not have kids. Why is it selfish to not have kids? Every time somebody says this, they never really give me a good reason. If anything, I found that parents can be very selfish because either their kids can do no wrong, they spoil their kids, and if the kids do wrong to you and you complain, these parents will get overly protective, unless of course they're good parents and can see that the kid has done bad. But in this day and age of mollycoddling and kids can do no wrong and what have you, we've pretty much raised my generation, which are the most selfish and self-entitled generation of kids.
In a previous video, I did say that you'd be hard-pressed to hear me argue against people not wanting to have kids, but that's not what I'm doing in this response. I agree with you. If you want to have kids, have kids. If you don't want to have kids, don't have kids. And I don't think anybody else's opinion should really matter in that. But I will make 2 quick points on this matter. First of all, kids are an investment in the future, and if you don't invest in a company, you're not entitled to a say in how that company works. Therefore, if you're not going to have kids, you're not really entitled to a say in how the future is going to work. And the second point I'd like to make is that there is absolutely nothing that you can ever create, build, or do that will outlast time, with one exception, and that's having a kid, and that's because a kid can replicate itself as well. As far as the spoiled little brats go, here's my advice. When your kid acts like a brat, smack 'em. And make no mistake, I don't condone child abuse. I haven't hit my kids in years. I don't have to anymore. The first 2 or 3 smacks got the message through.
And yes, number 4, physical and mental changes. Going through pregnancy or going through having your firstborn brings about many physical and mental changes. So let's start with the woman, shall we? Because that's probably the one that we can most agree on. Now with women, their entire body and their mental state changes. For example, their body has increased amount of hormones which can impact their mood, impact their personality. And let's not forget the physical changes. Pregnancy and labour puts a hell of a lot of physical strain on women, so they may put on weight, parts of their bodies may become weaker, it might even develop some kind of arthritis in their hips if they have quite a lot of children. In fact, they can even die. Sometimes they may have a miscarriage, which can give them mental problems, let alone the hormones causing issues with their mood, and postnatal depression. Not all women find it fine and dandy after having a child. And let's not forget, some of these women might not have very long maternity leaves or have any at all and have to go straight back to work, which only increases the pressure on their bodies, and the kids won't be with them for very long.
Where it's true women do go through a great deal during and after pregnancy, and that it can be very dangerous for certain women. I've met very few women who wanted to have children and then had children and said that they wouldn't do it again. You see, with great risk comes great reward.
And now let's go to the dads. Now you may be thinking, physical changes? Dads? No way. Well, men do go through some kind of physical change. That is mainly hormonal. When he enters a relationship, that decreases slightly. Then when the mother is pregnant, it decreases even more. And then when the child is born, again, it decreases. I don't know why. I saw this on a documentary on the BBC. I do believe this is probably because his parental instincts are kicking in, which probably means he has to be more nurturing, more caring, and can't be as competitive and aggressive as he once could as either a younger man or as a single man. So there's a physical change, and that also impacts his mental health as well, because then he becomes different, becomes calmer potentially, or even more stressed, and both parents become stressed because the child cries and bawls all the time because it doesn't know how to say, I'm hungry, I'm sad, I want to go to sleep, I want to wake up. So they get tired, they argue, and some couples, because of this stress, because they can't sleep, because they can't see each other all the time, because one parent is stuck with the child more than another, this creates friction and thus divorces. So childhood, rearing and having kids can lead to divorce rates increasing, although probably not as much as some other factors as we were aware of on this channel.
I'd like to refer you back to my analogy about a fist fight with God, but that would be lazy. Instead, let me tell you what I went through. Less aggressive? No, not really, just more focused aggression. As far as calmer, well, you do lose a lot of your vulgarity, which, in my case, eliminated most of my vocabulary. But you also become more patient. You don't necessarily become more nurturing, but you do become more firm, more decisive, more driven, and more focused. I can't imagine anything that I've ever undergone which has made my life better than having my kids. Like I said before, I was a total waste of human before they showed up.
And 5, children are ungrateful. Children are amongst the most ungrateful specimens on this unholy earth. Children are not grateful that you put them into this world. They do not care that other people live in this world. All they seem to care about, at least for a number of years, some of them do mature to the extent that they do care about others. This is a slow process, I do agree. They simply don't care. They will be naughty, nasty, they will be selfish. And these parents will just think, oh, this is amazing, this is a fantastic thing. Look, we just brought these things, these meat bags into the world. Aren't you happy for us? And for the rest of us who don't have children, who don't want to increase the strain on the planet that we call home, we say no.
So there's a connection between point 5 and point 4 that I think you might have missed out on. See, during point 4, you said the child can't tell you when it's hungry, when it's sleepy, and so forth and so on. And children aren't necessarily ungrateful, as they're incredibly needy, because they're children. And as children, they usually have all their needs met by an adult. They also haven't formed the kind of relationships with other people that make them value those people above themselves. So yeah, there's a certain level of selfishness to it. And only over time do they develop the humility and qualities and characteristics of an interactive human being. If you spoil your children, if you don't smack them when they're being little jerks, if you don't correct them when they're doing wrong, if you allow them to get away with whatever they want, and if you give them everything they ask for, then they're never going to grow into adults. They're going to remain children. And that's often why people tell adults who are acting selfish, rude, and inconsiderate that they're acting like children, because that's how children act. I guess my point is that children being ungrateful is kind of a moot point, because children by their very nature are selfish and don't understand the concept of gratitude unless you teach it to them. So if your children are ungrateful, that's not on them, that's on you. And for the rest of you who don't have children, well, I used to be one of you too, and when I was one of you, I really didn't want children. I didn't want to bring anybody else into the world. I agreed with almost everything Mitch said on this. But the difference between Mitch and I is that I actually have children, and it is a life-altering experience. It's kind of like taking quantum physics. It will change your entire perspective of the universe, and everything after that will be different. Before I had children, people would tell me, when you have your own children, you'll understand. And I would be like, no, I can get it now. Like, I can put myself in the right mental position. But I was wrong. I couldn't. And the reason I couldn't is because I didn't have children. So you can't see things from a perspective unless you actually have the ability to have that perspective.
So there we have it, people. That's the end of the video. My top 5 reasons for not having kids. Have you got more top 5 reasons? Do you agree? Do you disagree? If so, write down in the comments below. I've been CharmingMan93. Like and share the video, subscribe to my channel, donate to my Patreon, and I will see you all later.
Alright, are you ready for the shocker? I do have reasons that you shouldn't have children. In fact, I have a lot. I think that there are a tremendous number of reasons that people shouldn't have children. But I'm not going to go into any of them here because there are just so many, and they're across so many different spectrums and so many different concepts and so many different relevant factors of why you shouldn't have children. But not a single one of them has to do with children or the way that children are. Not a single one of them has to do with the economy. Not a single one has to do with the planet. Not a single one has to do with any of the things we brought up in here. But there are still a myriad of reasons that people shouldn't have children, and every single one of those reasons has to do with the people having the children in question. People shouldn't have children if they are children. People shouldn't have children if they have no concept of how to care about something more than they care about themselves. And people shouldn't have children if they're not able to make the necessary changes or unwilling to make the necessary changes required to take care of children. Children are bigger than you. Children are bigger than me. Children are bigger than all of us put together. You see, time will outlast us all. And I'm kind of touched on this earlier in the video, but I really want to go into detail, and I want to hit this point home. So I'm going to go a little bit above and beyond saying that one day you're going to die. I'm going to push you a little bit further over that precipice of reality and tell you this. One day, somebody will say your name in reference to you for the last time ever. And from that point forward, no one will ever speak about you again. And there is nothing you can build, nothing you can write, nothing you can make, nothing you can do that will outlast time, that will outlast our planet, that will outlast our sun, that will outlast our galaxy crashing into the Andromeda galaxy. Except a child. You see, a child is the key to immortality. Because like I said, one day you're going to die, one day somebody's going to say your name for the last time. And a child has the ability to reproduce itself. And if taught well, encouraged, enlightened, and given purpose and drive, our children could bring our species into the stars where we won't be bound by the lifespan of our own planet. And that would be the counterpoint that I give for why people should have children. That is, if they want to. Well, that's it for this video. I've left a link in the description to Mitch's channel, and he has a lot of great content, so be sure to check him out if you already haven't. If you like this video, you can do the like, share, tango below, and if you really like this video, you can hit that subscribe button. And as always, this is Dolphin Radio, broadcast on a frequency too high for humans, updated regularly through the sub-ether.